Hey YouTube, it's the Pied Piper.
Are you listening?
Shut up and sit down.
It's the Pied Piper.
It's my channel and I'm the other one.
Hey YouTube, it's the Pied Piper. This YouTube.
This YouTube thing? This YouTube version? Hey YouTube, it's Piper. Everything I read tells me that I should tell you to subscribe now instead of at the end of the video, so I'm just going to have to let you know if you're watching this and you've watched any more than just this video, you should probably subscribe. And even if this is your first video, you should subscribe too so that it's not your last video. Because I don't know where my videos show up as far as how they're recommended, to be wholly honest. My recap for The Passage will be up soon, but I'm also going to be starting other reviews, and I've been telling people for a long time that I was going to do a literature review, and specifically I'm going to be reviewing like books that are multicultural, and usually they're probably going to have some type of a swirl relationship. Most of the time it's going to be a black woman and another brother, whoever that brother is, whether he be white, Asian, Mexican, or Latino, or just whatever. But it's just not going to be two people of the same race. But every once in a while I might throw in some popular ones, especially some notable authors who have put out stuff that just so happen to have like a couple of characters that they include that are multicultural. And very few like New York Times best-selling authors really ever like tiptoe into that world. Certain few that I give props to who do it. People like some honorable mentions are like Lindsay Sands. I really wish Larissa Ione would do it because she's one of my favorite authors. But I know that Lindsay Sands does tiptoe and actually have, or a heroine who is actually not white. I think she's black. Yeah, she is, because she's in the Arjanu series. So yes, she's black. She's with Armin, I believe his name is. If you want to read that series, let me know. I don't know how this series is going to go. People might not enjoy literature. A lot of people don't read. I read a lot. I've been a nerd since way back. And that kind of is going to open up this video specifically because I didn't want to just start talking about books and things, and you guys are probably like, who cares, right? But it's obvious that I would definitely talk about TV or movies because I even do that on Love and Swirl, my show, which if you haven't watched my show channel, go watch that. At the end, there will be a little thing that you should go and hit on that and go watch the archives of the show because we haven't done a show in a little bit. On that show, we do talk about different things going on in the media and everything, especially when there's any type of swirling relationships or couples that pop up. If you are watching my, Roswell, New Mexico recaps and reviews, which are on hiatus at the moment because I'm not sure if I should keep reviewing it, but it is supposed to be multicultural. And then I'm also doing The Passage, which is very multicultural. But no, I've always talked about that kind of stuff, and people probably think like, what do you care, or what does it matter to you? And it matters a lot to me. One, I'm an author and I write stories that are never between people of the same ethnicity. If I have an Asian heroine, then she's never going to get together with another Asian. And I know people are probably like, why? Why can't two Asians find love? They can find love, and traditionally they do. That's why I mix it up. So yes, Asians and Asians get together. There is black love, and black love is beautiful. But I think that women have always been held to a higher standard as far as not branching out and opening up their dating options. And so I really thought that in my writing, I would make it so that every girl, any woman, especially women who are like me, can understand or maybe find a character that they can love that resembles or closely resembles their way of life. This is what this video is about. That's a roundabout way of getting back on topic. This video is specifically about how this all started. So then when I start putting up these reviews of TV shows or more movies or whatever and literature, you're not going to be like, where do these pop up at? I always say, and I did say this in one of my videos about, I think my small YouTuber tag that I did, even though I'm technically not considered a small YouTuber, but I did in that tag that I did a little bit of explaining as to why I decided to go in this direction with my channel, but I'm going to go in more depth as as far as a little bit more about me in this so that you understand where all this comes from. And it's not from a self-hating place or anything like that. It actually is a lot to do with self-love. When I was really young, like I did not have the luxury of having a childhood. I was born and I basically had adult issues from that time on. I've always been really mature, I guess. Even when I was immature, I was still more mature than kids would ever be. So I never really related to a lot of people. Not only did I have, an excruciating sort of home life that was not all that great, I have, my own ethnicity issues, which everybody knows, Blaxican. And so people know that, I have that, and I have had people who, you hear the way I talk and you see the way I am, and my controversial first video that got me in such deep water on YouTube. So you'll understand why it's always been important for me, or made me, I guess I've always felt very different my whole life. From a childhood that I could never really talk about with anybody, especially anybody my age, and then growing up and not having any representation in my life, in my personal life, and most of you know that, I didn't grow up with my biological family, and so then I just kind of had a lot of world input in my world, but I didn't have anybody that I could really visually identify with. And as a kid, I didn't really know that was important, and I've always identified with people on a deeper level. It's never really been skin tone deep. It's always been, are you a decent human being? What are your characters? What are your character traits? What are your values? What are your morals and standards? That kind of thing is what makes me connect with someone. But I did worry that, I didn't see people that kind of resembled me. I was a nerdy kid too. Well, I was popular, but I was also nerdy. I had like my nerdy stuff that I did that nobody really knew about, or I just made my popular stuff so popular that people couldn't judge me for my nerdy habits. And because my home life was just atrocious, I was very popular in school, but I was very focused. And I was a good student and everything, but I was very focused on school, and that because my home life was so bad, and I just wanted to take everything from my home life and chart a new course for my life. I was like so devoted to school, and I was in band and I was in strings. I don't know if anybody knows what strings is, but it's when you learn things like the piano, the violin, the viola, the cello, the bass, stuff like that. And so I was in strings. I played every instrument. I was in band. I played the baritone because I wanted to be the only girl that played a baritone, while all the other girls were playing little frou-frou wind instruments like a flute and stuff. I was playing this big, huge baritone that nobody else was playing, and I've always been short and little, so it was pretty weird, people seeing me walking around with this baritone. So I like to do things that really had me stand apart. But I was also a cheerleader, and I was also in chorus, and I've always just been the weird one. And so when I was in 5th grade, I was still living my very adult life for a 5th grader. But when I would be at school, I would be wholly invested. But I couldn't shake some very nerdy things about me, which I didn't even realize were nerdy things because I just didn't connect with a lot of kids. I love to write. I love to read, and I was kind of a morbid reader when I was a little kid. Like, everybody else was reading like these little tiny books that really weren't all that great. One of my favorite book series when I was a little kid was The Boxcar Children, and I liked it not because, and no, they weren't like ethnically diverse in that book, but I liked it because the kids were orphans, and they at first lived all alone in this boxcar. That's why they were called The Boxcar Children, and I loved those books for some reason. I think it's because I could identify with not having parents and like having to take care of siblings and just that whole thing. And I think that really was like appealing to me. And then for whatever reason, I got into The Diary of Anne Frank. And then I got into that book, Number the Stars. And it was one of my favorite books. I liked a lot of the scary books too. I've always liked horror and just scary things. So there was those books, what were they called? And there'll be pictures flying by here, so you'll know what I'm talking about. There was these books called Who's Afraid of the Dark or whatever, and I used to read those books, and I would just love every story. I was like, oh, the scarier, the better. I felt like nothing was scarier than my actual life. And to this day, nothing ever has been scarier than my actual life. So I enjoyed those books. And yeah, like I said, I was a morbid reader. I read The Diary of Anne Frank several times. I read Number the Stars, and those are specifically about Jewish people. But then I read books also, the diary, what was it? Not the diary, but it was Jane Pittman, a whole story about Jane Pittman. And then also about Frederick Douglass. Like, nobody was assigning me to read these stories. I went out and sought out these stories because that was the kind of kid that I was. But then I did have my little moments that were just kind of idealistic, and I did have my ideas of fairy tales. One of my very favorite and one of my only children's movies I really ever got to own and watch a lot more than once was Cinderella. So to this day, Cinderella has always been my favorite story, and it was because it was this girl who, she was nothing but like the housekeeper basically, and she becomes a princess. And for me, that was like so idealistic, and I think I always rooted for the underdog because in life I felt like I was the underdog. I did read other kids' books like the Ramona Quimby age 8 books or whatever, and I did read, but those did not hold my attention for very long. And then I read Sweet Valley High twins, and like normally people read those when they're like older. I was reading those, I was like 11. I read a lot of Shakespeare's plays, and Romeo and Juliet was also one of my favorite stories, but also one of my ultimate favorite was Much Ado About Nothing. So I was super happy when they made it into a movie, and Keanu Reeves and Denzel Washington were brothers in that movie, and that was like heaven to me because it more so reflected what was life for me. And I was like, oh hey, Keanu Reeves and Denzel Washington? Sure, they're brothers. I'll suspend disbelief for that. I liked it. I liked anything that showed a world that I felt like I belonged in. And I couldn't, relate to people who had this happy home and everything. And I read books like, I loved poetry, Where the Sidewalk Ends, that book. Oh, there used to be this poem in there, and I won't recite it because I don't know how copyright rules work for that kind of stuff, but I still remember it because it was like that kind of a deal to me. The book that changed my world was Beverly Cleary, Dear Mr. Henshaw, and it was this kid writing to this author and telling him, that he wanted to be an author, and for whatever reason that book just struck a chord with me. And I remember I was in around 5th grade when I read that book, and I was just like, that speaks to me. So I had written this book in 5th grade, and I illustrated it and everything, and it was for kids that were far younger than I was, but I illustrated it, and I would tell you the title, but I don't want you finding it because I did actually have it published, and I don't know if it was ever widely available, but I know it was available in my school's library, and I felt like such a G. And I'm walking around like my ish don't stink because I'm like, I published a book. I'm a 5th grader. Check me out. And then everybody else is looking at me like, hey, loser, 5th graders don't read. They play and do this and that. Then I got knocked down a few pegs and was like, dang it, my weird flag is showing. So I need to do other stuff. And that's when I started doing things like cheerleading and being cutesy and liking boys, or at least caring if boys liked me back. I had a big, huge crush on this boy named David Jensen. I was really weird. School was like a whole nother life for me. But when I was reading, and I still did read at that time, and I even read those All-American Girls books. There was like a book called Samantha, but then there was this one book with a little brown girl, which was black, but she was a brown girl on the cover, and I was so excited because I had never seen a book with any other girl that wasn't, white and lovely. And then they had books that had Latinas in it, or not really Latinas. I think they were Mexican girls, or at least Indian. I don't know. All I knew is that they were different, and I was different than the norm, and I could relate so much more to that. And so I was always drawn to those types of things. And, you get busy with life as you get older, things happen, you just go down a whole other trail, and life just takes a hold of you, and everybody knows that I had a kid really young, and then I had to get on that train, and so everything I did was to get money and provide. And so I kind of lost myself for several years. And even though I had done some things, like I was in radio for years, which a lot of people know that I was a radio disc jockey, that was like a passion of mine for a while. And I did acting, and I was doing some modeling, and just all these other things on the side. And those were great. But one time I had gone to California, I'll never forget, because I was doing this video, and I'm never going to disclose what music video I was in, because I wasn't necessarily a video hoe, but I was video hoe adjacent for a video. So I was just I had clothes on and everything. It's not my finest moment, I'll be honest. But yeah, so I was doing this video, and I was there, and I was talking to a couple of friends, and a friend that was a producer, and we were talking about my life and just life in general. And after we talked for a few hours, he was like, you need to write a book or a screenplay. Your life needs to be a movie. And I was like, haha, so funny. I'm not writing not one word about my actual life because I don't want people knowing everything that I went through. And just my life definitely is movie worthy, but I'm not going to be the one that could ever feel comfortable enough to out exactly just every single thing that happened in my life. There's just too much stuff, and it really could be like several movies. So I didn't want to do it, and I kind of brushed it off because even though I had lost my way a little bit, I had always been writing, and actually I had had some poetry published. I had a whole book of poetry that I wrote that was like, 40 poems deep, and I had written that just like on the fly. Just, that's always been a passion of mine, is to write and create and be creative. And so I had that, but I never really got serious about writing. But that experience made me think, I really need to figure out who I am again, And by this time, I had been in several relationships and, already, and, I was a card-carrying mom club member at a very young age. And, I had, tons of things that I was, living life, but I wasn't really living life. And I had somehow lost who I was in the shuffle of just, everything that was going on. And so I decided to read some books and look into some stuff, and I figured out I was going to write a screenplay. I thought, I can't write a story based on my actual life. I just can't. It just brings up too much stuff, and at that time I wasn't ready to delve that deep and tell everybody. I was working on it, in other ways, but I was not gonna out everything that's happened in my life. But I did think that if I could do one loosely based on my life, that would be interesting. So I wrote this screenplay, and I went ahead and I sent it into this place to have it edited and had it critiqued. And they sent me back some notes, and I was like, screw your notes, I'm amazing. Tore them up figuratively. They were in an email, so I didn't actually tear it up, but in my mind it was thrown in the trash. I was like, I'm amazing, I don't want your suggestions. So then after I got out of my emotional line, I was like, let me look at that email again and see what he thinks I should change. So I looked at it and read it and thought about it and processed it and thought, okay, I know how to make this work. So I wrote the screenplay again. I had sent it out to several different places. I put it up on certain websites, entered it into screenplay or film festivals. I just really didn't do all that well. But then one film festival, which was a big one for me because this was the one that was in Beverly Hills, and it was the only one that mattered to me. And that one I actually placed in, and they were floored. And I got all this criticism that was super good. People were like, oh my gosh, she's like, if you hadn't told me you were a woman, I wouldn't have known. You're a female M. Night Shyamalan, but better. Not meaning to toot my own horn, but beep beep. It was pretty awesome. And so I was really geeked. I didn't realize I had that kind of talent, and it was a really good reception that I didn't realize was even possible. And I was getting a lot of different feedback from a lot of different places. And then because I had copywritten it and stuff, I'm always really good at making sure I own everything. But then people started talking to me, people I never expected to contact me were suddenly contacting me. And at first I didn't believe anybody who contacted me. I was like, yeah, Ray, you're from where? Psh, I don't believe you. Yeah, Ray, you can option my movie. What? I was not even wanting to entertain anything until I really took a step back again and read some stuff, and then even sent some stuff to people I knew who were managers and agents, and they're like, oh no, this is real. And I'm like, hold the phone. So then I wrote 16 screenplays and was getting really good reception, and I even optioned one of them to be a Bollywood movie and to be optioned rights in America, and I was super excited. But then of course, because I am an overachiever, I was like, I wonder if I could write a novel. And so I read books and looked into some things, and I was like, yeah, I think I want to give this a whirl. Now, I loved the first novel I wrote, and apparently I was alone in that thought. And it was 125,000 words, probably 130,000 words, and it was very verbose, but I loved it. I looked at it like it was my baby, but I couldn't send it out because that was like sending out your real child into the world and being told, oh, she's ugly, or somebody going, oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't want that kind of feedback, so I didn't send it out anywhere. I was really weird about it. And so then I wrote another novel, and I was like, okay, maybe this one can do well. But then I got this amazing idea for a screenplay, and I was like, hold the phone on the novels, I gotta write this screenplay. For me, screenplays were faster to write, and they are faster to write, and they just come to me, and sometimes I get these ideas and I just gotta write them. So I wrote this screenplay, and literally probably in 45 minutes, I wrote the screenplay. I know it was 45 minutes because I had written it on several different pieces of paper in between, cooking dinner for kids scripts and like doing all this different stuff, I was also writing this screenplay. And so I had to write it like wherever I could find a space to write, because I wasn't able to sit down and like get it done immediately. And then that one I finished and sent out, and it got rave reviews. And I was floored, but that's another story for another time. Then I ended up writing another novel after that. And again, that novel, I still was like, oh, I don't want to kill my darlings. I read Stephen King's book on writing, and I thought, well, maybe that'll help me kill my darling. Yeah, it didn't help. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I read a couple of other people's books on and different authors that I had definitely had a lot of respect for. I read their books and I was like, yeah, that doesn't work for me either. So I wasn't ready. And then I finally wrote a book that I was like, okay, I dig it. And I got really good feedback. I became a part of the writing community in a very big way and entered a writing group and did that in whatever spare time I could find and just tried to make it work from there. And then a few years later, I wrote the book that's out now. But everybody's always like, well, you don't have that many novels and you're an author. But I'm like, yeah, I didn't start out in novels. I started out in screenplays, and those don't get published like books get published. So I wrote a ton of screenplays, but you're never going to see those like on Barnes and Noble's shelves. If you do find me, let me know, because they shouldn't be there. So then I did that, and I started out like a lot of other females start out reading like romance novels, like Harlequin novels and stuff. And like I said, I started the whole Sweet Valley High thing when I was really, really young, like 11. And then like I went on this trail of only reading like really sad stories. Like I read a ton of sad books, lots of stuff. I read Edgar Allan Poe's, like all of his poetry, which was like really dark. And I just loved all of that stuff though. And I loved the creativity behind it. And I've always been somebody who is way more into fantasy and sci-fi, but I don't like to write sci-fi, and I don't write sci-fi, but I do write urban fantasy and dark urban fantasy and paranormal romance and supernatural and paranormal thriller. So I had really found my niche in that realm, and so I liked it. I still like it. But there's the woman in me who's like, I want to read about love and stuff, but every time I would read a book series, no matter who it was by, and I love like Jenna Showalter and, like I said, Larissa Ione, Christine Fagan, who is one of the honorable mention authors who does have a character who is not white. But you can only read about so many peach skin, alabaster skin, pale skin, and rosy nipple women before you're like, ugh, it gets annoying. Because I like to read romances. Once you read one, you have read them all, especially if you are an avid reader like myself. And I have read a ton, like millions of books, and I probably read 15 to 20 books a month. So I devour a book. I will like get into the series, especially if it's a good series. There was people like J.R. Ward, who I love J.R. Ward, but I always was like, why aren't any of these vampires black or Asian, or like, give me something. I'm tired of reading about all these rosy nippled, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. Like, I'm just tired of it. And that was a problem I had even as a kid when I started reading the Sweet Valley High stuff. I was like, yeah, I like the Wakefield sisters, but they don't look like me. And I was like, why doesn't anybody like me ever find any love? I don't understand. And then when I noticed that I had this attraction to men that were not stereotypically what people think I should be attracted to, I was even more worried, because I'm like, okay, great. I am more odd. Not only do I not have a childhood and I'm like an adult at 11 years old, but I also seem to only like boys who, well, I first got really attracted to red hair boys, and then it went to blonde hair surfer kind of boys, and then it went to skater boys. And yeah, as you can see, there's a theme here. And it was never that there was anything wrong with any guys of any other race. I dated, like I've said, I've dated several Asian guys as I got older, as an adult. I didn't date any Asian men when I was a teenager, but I did have a really good friend that was Asian, but we just like didn't date. He didn't date anybody as far as I knew, though, to be wholly honest. But as an adult, I've dated, like, seriously, some Asian men, Hispanic men, and so, like, I've branched out, but I've never dated a black man. And not to say that there's anything wrong with black men, because as you know, there is not. I don't have any ill will towards black men, nothing at all. I don't have anything bad to say about them. Men can be bad no matter what color they are. But for me, there was not anybody who had a world like me. And so when I started writing and became an author, I knew that I wanted to give women some color in their world, some diversity. And I got tired of going to bookstores and seeing like this small like African American love section that's literally like 2 dusty shelves in the back where nobody's ever been to, you know? I hated that. I hated that so much. And I was like, why don't these authors that I like write about these women of color? And then being an author and being a part of different writing groups, and even on the water cooler or writer cooler, I don't know what it is, but it's a website I'm a part of as an author. And like authors talk about why they don't branch out and write people of color characters, and they a lot of the times it's just a fear of offending somebody or anything like that. And I'm like, you don't really have to worry about offending them, just like don't make them stereotypical and you're good. Like if you're like trying to be something you're not in the book, that's obvious, but just make them have normal human issues. Like every human can relate to a certain set of issues no matter what color they are. And even when people want to convince you that that's not true, it is true. So it was always really shocking to me that the people that I really like, Kresley Cole, who she's a hit or miss author to me. Like I really do like her writing style, but it's that I like paranormal meets real humans, and hers are a lot of times just paranormal meets paranormal. But she does have some really good ones. McGreevy or whatever, I think is one that she wrote and I really loved, and Lothario or whatever, that was a really good one. Like I like a ton of different authors, and I really didn't know if I was ever going to read a book that had to do with romance and people who were like me, meaning they were a woman of a chocolatey complexion. Whether she's black skin didn't bother me. I just wanted her to look a little like me and maybe have some things that I could feel in common with her. And you know, Sherilyn Kenyon writes amazing books, but she has 0 characters of color really. And it bugs me because I'm like, you could do it. You could do it. You write your book set in New Orleans. How come you don't have people of color? And so I was like, I'm going to fix that. I'm going to fill that void. And then I started looking online at I think it was Amazon first, or actually it might have been Barnes & Noble. And I discovered this little niche of all of these interracial romance novels. And I didn't even realize that even existed. And because they don't get published traditionally usually, and they're more independent, or the smaller publishing houses publish those, they don't get the same kind of press that other authors get. And so I realized though there was a ton of books, and I was super stoked. And so I started reading like I'd never read before. Well, Aaliyah Burke was one of the first ones that I read. And she had this book of the Megalodon team books, and I was like, oh my goodness. First of all, they're like Navy SEALs or whatever, and this is amazing. And they're all interracial. I was super excited. And then Erosa Knowles, who I really like, and then she wrote this about this 3X construction, and it's all these ex-cons who have a business, and they are about it, and they all are interracial. They're these white guys, and there's a black guy thing, but everybody was dating interracially in those books, and they fall in love and get married and have children and everything, and I'm just like, oh, I felt like I had found a slice of heaven. Shira Azad, who writes a little bit more on the erotic side. Lena Matthews I found, and she wrote this book that I enjoyed so much called He's So Shy, and I wanted to put a clip of it in here, but I couldn't find it anywhere. It's not even out anymore to be purchased. It's on my Kindle, but that's it. Then as time went on, I found Mercedes Keys and L.V. Lewis, who I love. And if you like the 50 Shades of Grey books, or maybe you thought there was something missing from those books, maybe a little color, then you will like L.V. Lewis's 50 Shades of Jungle Fever, because that was a really good book. It was hilarious. I read the 50 Shades of Grey. I knew what she was getting at when she wrote that, and it was hilarious to me. I mean, I just started finding all these authors, and then, let me see, I wrote the authors down. Tiffany Ashley, who wrote Love Script, and that was the best book, and I didn't find that one until way later. There's Delaney Diamond, Yvette Hines, Delilah Hunt, Rosa Knowles, who I already told you, but she's amazing, so I could say her twice. Billy London, she wrote a series she wrote a book called Windows, and that was my first book I read of Billy London, but she writes a lot of shorter books, and I love authors who write long books. I'm like, hook me up with a book that's 1,000 pages, and I'll read it. My favorite book from Sherilyn Kenyon is like over 1,000 pages, and I was in heaven reading Akra On's book. I was like, this is amazing. I'm weird. Tressie Lockwood, she has this book. The very first book I read of hers was called Something Unexpected, and it was unexpected because it was one of the very first like interracial romances I read, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. Sienna Minks, she writes this story about like a mafia family, the Battaglia series. That's a really good one. Well, some of them are good. It was kind of hit or miss for me with that one, but it's a good read if you like that. Latrivia Nelson, well, it was Latrivia Nelson, but now she's Latrivia Welch, and she writes all of the books of the Medlow series. Oh my goodness. She's also one of those people I got into, and I started their series from the beginning and just worked my way down, and it's like crack. I love it. I'm like, I just can't get enough of her stories. Lisa G. Riley, she wrote a book called Simply Wicked, and I loved that book. And it's the only book I've read of hers, unfortunately, but it was amazing. Delilah Rose also writes shorter stories, but they're still just as good. She might have some longer ones, but all I've ever seen is like shorter stories, and I have to search for these. Eve Vaughn and Shara Azad. First of all, Eve Vaughn is an amazing writer. I have read pretty much everything she's written, even some stuff that I was like, but I read it. And then there's her and Shara Azad, who teamed up to write this book called Hostile Takeover. Let me tell you, I was there for that book. Or Zenna Wynn, and she has a book called Illicit Attraction. It's kind of like a May December type of story, but it's good too. And Kimberly K. Terry. Now, she was actually the very first author who was actually mainstream that did write a book that was interracial romance, and I read, and it was just like candy. That was the book I read of hers. So I'm gonna like include clips of all of those, and they will be floating around here, so check those out. I discovered though from being on all these writer websites and a part of these groups that even women who are not women of color, they also want to read books that are not just, lily white romance is what I call it, or the Nicholas Sparks kind of romances. They do like a little diversity, and a lot of women who are Caucasian women, they were like, yeah, we could actually enjoy some books like that. We just never see them, so they don't ever get into them. So it's funny because I don't actually write the genre that I get into reading most of the time, but some of them, every once in a while, I'll find a good one that's an interracial one that also is in the genre I write, but usually I don't really read the genre I write, at least not in this realm. I do, like I said, I read J.R. Ward, I read Sherilyn Kenyon, I read Kresley Cole and Jenna Showalter, and there's one I'm missing, and she's my favorite. I'm gonna feel like a butthead for not remembering it. But then there's this woman, Rosemary Lowry, and she wrote this book series about vampires that I just love. But again, it's like Anne Rice and stuff where they don't really write diversity, but they do write in the genre that I write. So I only every once in a while find one of those that I really enjoy. Like Christine Fajon is another one, but she actually has had at least one or two, and more recently she has about maybe 4 women of color as like her leading women. So she's actually one that I respect for that. But there's a lot of different ones. So anyway, that's the long and short of it. And this video probably is already bordering on far too long, but I wanted to come and prepare you and give you a little backstory as to why I chose to write in this way, why I review the stuff that I review, and why I follow the same path that I follow. And one of those things being majorly is that I think that tolerance is key in this world. And your skin color should not be a deciding factor as far as whether or not you deserve love and whether or not you get love. And just because you're a color or a skin color or an ethnicity or whatever you want to call it, that shouldn't keep you from having love with whomever you want to find that love with. And so I am really big on just race issues as far as teaching, tolerance and anti-racism and just acceptance. And I do suggest that women of color, any color, do date outside of their race. Not that they have to. If they don't want to, that's fine. But don't be limited by your ethnicity. And that's what is the most important thing, is to get love and have love. And I see too many good women who are women of color who are just waiting around for a man to finally recognize them who's within their same ethnicity, when I think, you know what, somebody could love you and they just might not look like you. So that's who I rep hard for, and that's what I write, and that's what I do, and so that's what I'm going to bring to you in this series of reacting to different literature. So if you think I should read something, or you want some advice on what you should read, because like I said, I have read millions of books. I have lots of ideas, and of course I will read my own stuff, but what do you think about all of that? And do you have any favorite authors, or maybe some books that I haven't heard of that just so happen to have a more diverse cast? Like the show Still Star-Crossed. I learned about that show on YouTube and then found it and realized that it didn't get any more than one half a season. But it was amazing, and I think if a lot more people knew about it, it would have got way more press. So like, subscribe, comment, share.
Share any way you can.
Smoke signal, Morse code,
carrier pigeon, telegraph,
2 cans of string.
beeper, pager, they still got pager, snail mail. Tell somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that, hey, Piper has a new video. Bye, YouTube.
Shut up and sit down.